Hello and welcome. I am your host, Goblin Kwain. Tonight we are going to read some ghost stories, first-hand paranormal experiences from a website called Liminal Earth, where people post their stories and pin the location on an interactive map. Because of this, the locations become as much part of the story as the tales themselves. Therefore, in addition to reading the stories, we'll also poke around the locales where the tales took place and dig up any legends we can find. So, if you're watching the video, you can get a peek at the locations where the stories took place as I'll be cruising along Google Maps Street View as I read. And if you're just listening, then sit back and relax. It's time to get started. This story took place in Gloucester, Massachusetts in July of 1987. It was submitted by Louisa P. and it's called Beachfront Apparition. In the summer of 1987, when I was 27, I left my friend's beach house in Gloucester, Massachusetts, early in the morning during a rainstorm for a solitary walk on the beach. When I had passed all the beach houses on my right to an area of sand dunes and marsh grass, out of this area came a man in yellow rain gear, looking and walking towards the waves, perpendicular to my course. As I got closer, I saw he was older with a gray beard, and that his rain gear was vintage Macintosh. He looked like some guy on a fish sticks package. I was very into vintage clothing in those days, so I thought I would ask him where he found it. When I got closer, I saw a look of concern on his face, and that his gaze was fixed on the horizon to my right, except there was no horizon, because we were in the midst of a heavy rainstorm. I decided to merely compliment him on the rain gear. When I was 3 feet from him, I saw all the broken capillaries on his skin, as if he drank, and that his eyes were still fixated on that non-existent horizon. Clearly upset, though there was nothing to see. So as I passed just behind him, I merely said, "How's it going?" He neither looked at me nor replied. When I had walked a few more steps, I thought, what is he, too cool to say hi when we're the only two people on this beach? I turned to look with resentment, but he was not there. Tried to figure it out. Could he have run all the way down to the waves? Was he trying to drown himself, hence the anguish? Baffled, I watched for his Macintosh hat to surface, and when it didn't, with my brain scrambling for an explanation, I thought, ghost? What nonsense, right? I turned around to find his tracks in the wet sand. Mine were the only set of tracks on that beach. So, in my opinion, that is a great, simple, classic ghost story. This older, bearded man in the yellow rain gear is kind of like an archetypal presence about him, too. If you couldn't tell by the video, I was very intrigued by this large house looming in the distance over the beach. It cuts a pretty striking figure and looks to me like something out of a Daphne du Maurier story. While I eventually did find the actual house up close on Street View, it seems to be a private residence, so I'm not able to dig up any ghost stories about it, although it's sure to have some. I mean, just look at it. However, while digging for local haunted places and legends in Gloucester, I did find another beautiful cliffside house. Actually, it's a castle, and it's reputed to be haunted. It's called Hammond Castle, and it was constructed sometime in the 1920s by John Hayes Hammond Jr., a, quote, scientist, inventor, and art connoisseur of the highest order. Using different artifacts and architectural elements he picked up on his various travels, Hammond constructed a seaside European castle, which apparently has a mixture of medieval, Romanesque, French Renaissance, and Gothic features and styles. I mean, looking at these photos from inside the structure, it is absolutely gorgeous. But no castle would be complete without a few ghosts, right? Hammond himself is said to haunt his beloved structure, as well as his wife and a former groundskeeper. People often report catching strange faces and figures in photographs taken in the castle who weren't present at the time. Okay, so now we are going to move on to our next story, and this one took place in Mugginsville, California, around May of 2019. This one was submitted by Shasta Strange, and it's called Not the Renter. We purchased an old house in 2018 that we began slowly renovating while renting it out to a single middle-aged woman. Being fairly remote and our renter living alone, she was fairly skittish, and it was often a hassle coordinating when contractors could come and get work done, as she was very suspicious of everyone. She seemed to need to be out of the house if anyone were to come and work on the house, and they needed to be gone by the time she returned. We had a plumber coming and going over a few weeks who received the brunt of this suspicion, and he ran into a few moments where we would schedule time for him to come work on the house and had to cancel at the last minute as it wouldn't work out for our renter to be gone. One morning, I woke up to a few texts from the plumber. He explained that he had shown up to start work as planned at 8 a.m., and that when he tried to enter the house, he heard our renter screaming at him. He took off and was understandably upset. I immediately reached out to our renter and explained how we can't scare off contractors when we have their start times planned in advance, and was honestly pretty irritated. She responded confused and explained that she had been at work by 7:30 that morning and that there was no way she had been screaming at the plumber. When I told the plumber and asked if he could go back over, he said it would have to be another day as he was pretty shook up. He wasn't the kind of guy you would expect to be shook up by a lady yelling at him. It wasn't long after that my wife's aunt, who lives a few miles down the road, told us that the locals had always considered the house to be haunted, but didn't have any specific stories to share. We now live in the house ourselves, and thankfully haven't experienced anything. Our next-door neighbors explained that our house was a general store in the 1940s when it was first built, and that at some point there was a fatal car crash in the ditch behind our house. When we went to check it out, sure enough, there was still a rusty old car frame half sunk into the soil of the ditch. Another good one, simple but spooky and effective. I'm very curious about how this house was regarded as a haunted place by the locals. I wish the aunt had some specific stories, or they had been able to ask around a bit more about that. And unfortunately, I couldn't really find anything spooky or ghostly relating to the immediate area where the story took place or was pinned on the map. At least there was nothing on the internet that I could find. I'm sure there are. I mean, obviously, there's one in the story. But like they said, this area is very remote. There is not street view within the area that this location was pinned, so I kind of just had to get as close as I could. But this area is absolutely gorgeous. It's surrounded by incredibly beautiful wilderness. Mountains, forest, volcanoes. Mount Shasta is very close by, about an hour's drive. And like I said, while I couldn't find any tales or legends pertaining to the specific area where the story took place, there is a lot of interesting lore in the surrounding vicinity, particularly surrounding the monumentous volcano Mount Shasta. So that's where we will focus our attention. With an elevation of over 14,000 feet, Mount Shasta is visible from over 100 miles away, and in the past, this visibility stretched even farther. So it's no wonder that the native peoples held reverence for this mountain and regarded it as a sort of god. Tribes such as the Winnemem-Wintu regard it as their life source. And if you approach the mountain from a certain direction, you can see the reclining silhouette form of a woman. And there's stories saying that she's a princess, and her companion is comprised of another one of the mountain's crags. And natural formations like this that have kind of a simulacrum quality to them were hugely important and still are to indigenous peoples. I've never had the pleasure of visiting Mount Shasta or seeing in person, but reading about it, I get the sense that it is one of those awe-inspiring places like the Grand Canyon that just to be in its presence fills you with wonder and humbles you with the beauty of nature. And it's apparent from, photos and footage of the mountain how incredible it is, but I don't think you can really get the true sense and scale of it unless you visit. And regard for this mountain as a sacred place has held over time, beginning, of course, with indigenous native peoples, but it has also infected many groups and individuals over time with a sense of mystery, divinity, and power. It's inspired cults, and there are circulating rumors of a secret race of advanced beings from the sunken continent of Lemuria, living within the mountain via a complex tunnel system. These stories have been making the rounds since the late 1800s, some of them claiming to see strange rituals occurring on the high slopes of the mountain that appear as these odd, shifting lights. And there's also stories about the discovery of treasure-laden caverns and long, carpeted hallways within the mountain, and even the appearance of the Lemurians traveling into local towns to shop the wares. They are described in an article by Edward Lancer from 1932 as tall, barefoot, noble-looking men with close-cropped hair, dressed in spotless white robes. So there's a ton. I can't even begin to scratch the surface on all of the myth, lore, legend, and controversy that has sprung from Mount Shasta between all the beliefs of the indigenous peoples to the more New Age metaphysical beliefs assigned in more modern times. But there's a wealth of information out there. It's definitely stuff worth exploring. If you are interested, I will put some sources in my source list that's in the description of the video if you want to dive in even more. However, if you decide to physically explore the mountain, please keep in mind that it is the sacred ancestral land of various indigenous tribes of the area who still occupy the land with very limited resources and protection granted by the current U.S. government. So please be respectful, and I would encourage you to do some research about these peoples if you're planning a trip to Mount Shasta. So, moving on for now, let's read a couple short stories next. This one took place in Wales in December of 2001. It was submitted by Sarah, and it's called Mist with a Face. I lived in this house for a little over a year in 2001. In that time, I saw what I can only describe as a white mist with a face floating above my sister as we slept. My mom and stepdad also had knocking on their door every night. We knew previous people who lived there before us, and they had experienced paranormal activity such as doors and windows slamming and seeing figures outside. One of the scariest places I've ever been, let alone lived in. Very brief story, but they just quick-fired some creepy little elements there. White mist with a face, knocking on the door, figures standing outside. This location is actually at a crossroads, or at least where the author pinned the story, is at a crossroads on an unnamed road. So, again, we have this liminality. And the town that it's located in, Newcastle Emlyn, is on the River Teifi, which Wikipedia describes as forming the boundary between the counties of Ceredigion and Carmarthenshire. So, there's a lot of liminality at play here. Crossroads, boundaries, running water. Again, I couldn't find any ghostly legends in the town where the story took place, although trust me, this is Wales. Wales is chock full of them. So again, I'm sure they exist, they just weren't readily available to me online. But I did find a lovely dragon legend surrounding the ruins of a stone castle. The story goes that a wyvern swooped down upon the castle in the medieval era, perching on the castle walls, breathing fire as it landed. However, it soon fell asleep, giving the townsfolk time to determine a plan for its disposal. A soldier waded out into the Teifi River and released a red cloak, which the dragon attacked at once, much like a bull, I suppose. And the soldier was able to shoot the dragon in its weak spot. So remember how in The Hobbit, Smaug the dragon had that one little vulnerable spot where he was missing a single scale? Well, apparently this wyvern's weak spot was, up his rear. So, with a single shot up the tush, the dragon was killed. And while the wound gushed venom that killed all the fish in the river, the townspeople were still glad that the beast had been felled. Just a few scraps of the castle remain, but signs have been added relaying this epic tale, and a wooden seat carved to look like a dragon's egg has been placed among the ruins. Let's move on to our next short story. This one took place in Spain in 2020, submitted by Arlo, and it's called Bipedal Ghost Dog. I used to live in a small town next to the city of Granada. It just carried a weird vibe in general. The house I was living in had a lot of land and a lot of witchcraft used to be practiced there. One night I went to bed with my bedroom door open. When it's open, you can look straight down the hallway. I woke up in the middle of the night and started looking down into the hallway. My dog had passed away a few months prior, but there he was, in the hallway. I made eye contact with him, and he got on his hind legs, standing like a human, and walked out of the hallway. I remember vividly how his eyes looked the way they did before he died. He had cataracts. I slept with my door closed after that, until I moved out of that house. Seeing the ghost of your deceased pet is one thing, but seeing it stand up and walk away on its hind legs, that's another. Strange, to say the least. I wonder how they found out that their house used to have witchcraft practice in it. I'd be interested to hear more about that, and more about this weird vibe that the small town had, because, again, I couldn't find any legends or anything spooky regarding this area, although it is incredibly gorgeous. So, that leaves us to move on to our final story of the night. And actually, this post on Liminal Earth is really brief as well, but there's quite a story behind it. It takes place in Thailand. This was submitted by Bryn, and it's called A Shrine to Lady Knack. Thailand is chock full of ghosts, like in every tree and on every street corner. But Mae Nak, also known as Lady Knack, is the most famous one in my neighborhood. She has her own shrine and her own Wikipedia page. She is worshipped as a local deity by the people of Phra Kanong. So, that's the whole post. Like I said, it's brief, but we will go into the story and legend of Lady Knack because it's fascinating. So, the shrine to Mae Nak is located in the Swan Long district of Bangkok. It lays on the edge of a river, right where the water forks, and also appears to be on a boundary line. Once again, these liminalities crop up where supernatural happenings take place. The legend of Mae Nak is dated back to the mid to late 1800s. There are several versions, as there are with any good urban legend, right? But the most widely circulated one is this. Mae Nak was said to be a beautiful woman, married to a man named Mac, and pregnant with his child. Mae Nak's husband was called to war, and while he was away, she went into labor. But sadly, both Mae Nak and the baby died in the process. However, When Mac returned from war, he found Maynak and their baby alive, awaiting him at home. He was unable to receive news of her death while he was away, so this came as no surprise to them. He expected to find them waiting for him when he came home. When Mac began to talk to villagers of his wife and baby as if they were still alive, his neighbors delivered the sad news of her death and warned him that he was living with ghosts. But Mac brushed them off in disbelief. One night, when Maynak was cooking dinner, she dropped a lime, and it fell between the floorboards and down under the house, out of reach. Mac went to go retrieve the lime himself, but as he did so, he saw Maynak's arm stretch and slither down between the floorboards and pick up the lime. Seeing this seemed to shatter a glamour that had been put upon Mac, and he now noticed that the house, which he had previously seen no difference in from when he left for war, was now in a state of dishevelment and disrepair, as if it had been abandoned and unkempt for all that time. And it was then that he realized that his neighbors were right about his wife and child. So, upon realizing this, Mac flees to the local temple and begs the monks to help him. Maynak follows him, and the monks are able to capture her spirit within a jar and throw it in the river that flows behind the temple. And, like I said before, there are several versions of this story, with a couple different endings. One of the endings reinforces the Buddhist concept of non-attachment. But people are enamored with the ghost story and claim to see Maynak's ghost around the district. The tale is also used to encourage good behavior in children, as misbehaving will result in Maynak's ghost coming to get you. Tourists and Thai alike travel to visit the shrine to Maynak to pray and pay their respects to the ghost bride. It's considered to be a lucky place, so there are plenty of stalls selling lottery tickets outside, and people will also beseech Maynak for good fortune with their lottery tickets. In addition to her own shrine and Wikipedia page, Maynak also has over 20 films depicting her tale of woe. Alright, so that's going to do it for now. This video was a little shorter than I would have liked, but by the time I finished editing it, I didn't really have time to add another story. But the next upload I put up will be longer, and it'll be audio only. I've been alternating between doing an edited video and audio only. And I try and make sure that the audio only uploads are 45 minutes to an hour long. The videos are usually between 20 and 30 minutes because, well, it takes longer to edit a video and audio, but I think it's fun to switch it up. I like doing both, so for now I'll probably keep up with that upload schedule, and videos are posted every other Monday, just so you know. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tales and travels tonight. I do have a playlist of videos of me reading stories from Liminal Earth if you'd like to hear more, but until next time, have a comfy, cozy evening, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.